Welcome to Conversations with Epiphany. Let's Talk, the show where we dive deep into the essence of what makes our guests uniquely themselves. Join as we uncover the stories, experiences, and moments that shape their lives. From the triumphs to the trials, we're here to explore it all. Let's get talking and discover the heart of every story.
Hello, I'm here with Dr. Nigel, who just became Dr. Nigel, and I am so happy to have him on as our guest for today, talking about all things Black love. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm actually blown away by that intro. That was effective. That was efficient. I'm like, wow. That was cool.
Thank
I'm not gonna lie.
you. Thank you. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. And congratulations to you on all your accomplishments. I know, like I said, hard work, well done. So congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, no problem. We are here to talk about Black love. And what does Black love mean to you personally?
What does it mean to me personally? Ooh,
Right.
It means everything. So again, like I just recently defended my dissertation. My dissertation was studying Black love. I am a product of Black love. My parents recently just celebrated, well, not recently, but last year they celebrated 41 years of marriage. So I'm a product of it. I am a believer of it. I love the idea of the healing, the liberation, the connection between two Black individuals and being able to share, and celebrate our heritage, the historical standpoint, the culture together, being able to have somebody with you who understands who you are and what you've been through and where we've come as a community. It just means everything to me. Like, I'm a true believer of it. I believe it's so beautiful, and
Yes.
I love love.
Definitely, yes. Yes, definitely. And wow, 41 years of marriage, that is beautiful. And, in today's world, how do you define healthy Black love in today's society where, a lot of people aren't really getting to that 40-year mark of marriage or maybe not even 20-year mark. So how do you feel about Black love in today's world, in new society?
To be honest with you, I still hold it to such a high standard, and I still believe it's out there and it's real and it's top tier and it's possible. And it's not just from seeing like my parents' relationship, because like beyond my parents' relationship, I've definitely had my fair share of experiences of, other broken relationships or relationships that turned out to be a lot more toxic or whatever the case may be. But I think, to me, right, like the reason why I believe in it and I feel like it is still very possible is because of the amount of people who are in healthy relationships. Like, I think sometimes people get really, really down, or we look at social media and we look at kind of like what other people are talking about and we think it's not possible. But in the same way in which we are actively getting forced to look at all these negative kind of like portrayals, we can also look at all the healthy ones and take those into consideration too. So, although there are for sure some like negative kind of stereotypes and portrayals out there, I am full believer that like it's real and it's there, and you just got to look and see it.
That's so true. And like you said, social media just plays a small role in what it's like actually exists out in the real world. So that is true. You can't take, everything from social media and apply it to your own life. So what role does self-love play in building strong, loving relationships in the Black community?
Self-love is very, very important. Part of my research study was looking at like how media portrayals of Black love influence our social identity. And one of the things that I basically found in my study was this idea that the more that we feel connected with ourselves, the more that we feel pride in our own Black identity, the more that essentially creates this protective buffer that makes it so when we're looking at these like negative portrayals, it doesn't phase us in the same way. I think that self-love essentially is the root of healthy relationships, because the more that you can work on yourself, the more that you understand what you need, the more that you understand what works for you and what doesn't and what your boundaries are, it equips you with the tools to be able to navigate relationships in a way where you're not going to settle. You're not going to take put up with more of what you don't deserve. So I think at the core of being in relationships, it's understanding what it looks like to love yourself.
Right.
However, I also want to add on though that when it comes to self-love, I think this assumption of like, oh, you just love yourself, that people learn love. Like love is a learned behavior. So
Right.
as much as it's important for you to love yourself, it's also very important to put yourself in a position where you're surrounded by love, because a lot of
Exactly.
ways in which you think or you are taught love is how you love yourself. So if you're not put in positions to actually be in healthy spaces of love, it makes sense why people are unable to love themselves.
Right. That is so true. And I feel like the whole nature versus nurture, like growing up in your household, it teaches you like, okay, so this is how you should expect love. This is how it should feel to you. If it doesn't feel like this, if it doesn't feel safe, if it doesn't make you feel safe, then it's probably not the safest for you. And you loving yourself gives like, it tells other people like, okay, this is how I want to be treated. Nothing less. If I wouldn't do it to me, like you're not about to do it to me. So I think that is very important as well. Good take. So how do you think cultural and historical factors influence the way Black people experience and express love? And I think this is very have you heard the term like jumping the broom?
Yes. Yes.
And
Absolutely.
I found out, like, through some research that in slavery time, that was the only time Black people could get married because they couldn't legally, like, go. So that was their way of pledging their love for one another in like in front of everybody. So I think that's a big cultural historical fact, like in this day and age where people still jump the broom. Ever since learning that, I said when I do get married, I think jumping the broom is something that I want to incorporate in it, just from learning that history. So how do you think the history of that affects how we show love, express love?
It affects everything. First and foremost, there is no universe where I'm not jumping the broom when I get married.
Right.
Especially being like an African American man. Like there's
Right.
no, and to your point, like you essentially like answer the question in such a great way, because take it back to like when we were enslaved, right? There were a lot of slave codes, there were a lot of laws that didn't allow us to legally fall in love.
Right.
Not even just that, like we couldn't be married, we wasn't recognized, and there were dire consequences for loving, right? A lot of times, like the slave master was the person who had to who chose who somebody loves and whatnot and all of that. So essentially, like my point I'm making is like the ability to love was forbidden, and still with it being forbidden, black people back then still chose to love each other. So like love became a form of resistance. Love became a form of affirming their humanity. If they couldn't be recognized by the laws or the powers that be, they created their own ways, whether it was jumping the broom. So when you think of the historical standpoint of like not being able to love, but people still choosing to love, to affirm their humanity, to affirm who they are, that they are human beings, that we're not 3/5 of a man or whatever. You know what I mean? These are all very, very important aspects. And there's this theory that talks about post-traumatic stress syndrome, and essentially the trauma that was formed when we were enslaved is passed down to generation to generation. But not only is that trauma passed down to generation, but also the coping mechanisms. And if love being a coping mechanism of that, essentially is like what makes Black love so different is that our ability to love each other is not just a simple surface level, like I care about you, I love you. It's so much deeper. It's a form of healing. It's a form of connection, emotional connection and whatnot. So I think the historical context is what makes Black love so beautiful. And even in my study, when I was asking people like, hey, how do you even define Black love? The number one theme that everybody brought up was the cultural and historical standpoint. That's what makes it so different. So being able to like really honor that and love that and like respect that is like the part that makes Black love like such a beautiful thing.
Right. That's so true. And speaking on that, like you said, the trauma that is passed down, but also a lot of beautiful things that are passed down as well. What do you think are some of the biggest obstacles Black couples face in relationships today?
I think one of the biggest, I would say, barriers to Black love that couples face, that single individuals face,
Mm-hmm.
is this idea that the barriers in which we face is just a result of us. I think
Mm-hmm.
because we are Black in America, there are a lot of other factors. Like, for example, there is, like, my research found that there is this, like, quote unquote shortage of marriageable men. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the factors when it comes to that is based on, and I have the stats right here. Like, it's
Yeah.
based on demographic disparities,
Right.
it's based on educational and economic gaps, on financial strains, gender
Mm-hmm.
norms. But a lot of these like really break down to like mass incarceration rates, right?
Mm-hmm.
It
Right.
comes down to like health wise and mortality rates and different
Mm-hmm.
things that are systematic,
Right.
but we don't recognize that because a lot of times like we internalize it and it's just kind of like a known thing, or if it's not
Right.
known to everybody, it's just one of those things where it's like, well, we can't make an excuse for that, and it's like, no, this
Mm-hmm.
is real. Like, this
Mm-hmm.
affects how many men are out there, this affects how many women
Right.
are out there, this affects the community. So I think like for
Mhm.
one, a lot of times like we think it's just us, and there's so
Right.
many higher powers that
Mhm.
are at work. For
That's right.
one, I think for two, another
Mhm.
barrier for relationships is just
Mhm.
that there's a lot of discourse about kind of like external factors,
Mhm.
and we talk about, like, for example, like dating up or dating down, and
Right. Mhm.
should you date up and should you
Mhm.
date down, rather
Mhm.
than talking about like what does it look like to be in alignment with somebody, what does it
Mhm.
look like. It's not about like what can I get from you or what is this transaction.
Mhm.
It's more about how do we grow together. So I think that a lot of the conversations that we're having are not focused on the necessary skills to
Mhm.
equip us with the ability to love each other or to
Right.
grow in love. So those are
Right.
like a couple. There's probably like a thousands more, from like
Right.
colorism
Right.
conversations
Mhm.
to um, interracial
Right.
dating and relationship. Like,
Mhm.
there's so much, but I
Right.
think like the main thing is that a lot of the barriers are just so
Mhm.
much bigger, and they have systematic implications that we don't talk about enough.
Right. And like when you talk about like, the external factors, it's so true because it's like, okay, so, that certain things come and go, some things fade, but being in alignment with a person, I think that's what you have to have, like that's going to last through, years and years and years of dealing with one person.
Hmm.
So, speaking of that, what advice would you give to Black couples struggling to maintain their bond in a world that sometimes often doesn't prioritize Black love?
I would say, first and foremost, from an individual standpoint, you got to understand
Mhm.
what you need. Like, what do you need in this
Mhm.
relationship? What do you need for yourself? What do you need in life? Like, I think so much of this, the culture and like the discourse is pushing this, like, I don't need anybody, and I could do it all by myself, and
Mhm.
I am hyper independent. You know what I mean? Like, it's pushing
Right,
this narrative that's getting us to move away from reflecting on ourselves and reflecting on like
right.
what we really want and what we really
Yeah.
need. And it's
Mhm.
almost as if like we're getting pushed into the scarcity mindset. So I
Yeah.
think like first and foremost, whether you're in a relationship, whether you're single, you got to understand what you need, because
Right.
when you can really identify what you need, now you're able to communicate that to somebody else,
Exactly.
to your partner, to in the
Mhm.
dating world. So I think
Right.
first, understand what you need. Number
That's so
two
true.
is like the ability to communicate and understand what you need.
Mhm.
But the third one is you have to stand on your boundaries. I think there's a lot of
Mhm.
people
Right.
who are together with somebody because they're trying
Mhm.
to force it, and
Mhm.
it's out of guilt, it's out of convenience of being with this person, right?
Right.
You think that
Right.
like if you leave this person, you're never going to find anybody else. So I think a
Mhm.
lot of the struggle in which a lot of people face in relationships is this idea
Mhm.
of recognizing that you feel as if there's nobody else, or you have no other hope, or it's this big struggle with this person who's
Mm-hmm.
not even really willing to put in the work, put in the
Right.
effort, who are showing
Mm-hmm.
emotional intelligence or
Exactly.
respect, or all of
Mhm.
these elements. So you're just
Right.
trying to force it with that person. So I think first and foremost, you got to understand what you need, what you
Mm-hmm.
want, be able to
Right.
communicate that, recognize if that person is able to show up for you or if they're not,
Exactly.
and then move
Mhm.
accordingly. But
That's so true.
for mostly I would strongly encourage people is like, you really, going back to the self-love part,
Mm-hmm.
you really gotta like hone into like you. Figure out
Right.
you.
That's
And
true.
the more that you figure out yourself, the more that,
Mm-hmm.
again, the more you're equipped with the tools to be able to now navigate with somebody.
Right, that's true. And that boundary word, a lot of people
Oh
have
yeah.
problems with that word, with standing, what did I say? Standing on business, standing on boundaries.
Hmm.
And I think, like you said, with boundaries, I think it comes with like knowing yourself, knowing like, okay, yeah, no, I'm not about to do that, or I'm not about to compromise, myself. And boundaries like are for you and for the other person, because like, okay, so if I want this for myself, like some people might say, some people are just natural born like texters, like I just like to text, like if I just like to text, I don't really like to be on the phone like for past 15 minutes, I'm not a chit chatter. And if the person that you're with is like, well, like I kind of would have to talk to you on the phone, or like to hear your voice, I don't know, like I guess, like you said, it depends on the people that is in that space of in that space to know, like, okay,
Hmm.
either that could be a boundary that I can bend, or that's a boundary that I have to stand on. And the other person has to decide, like, oh, okay, like that's something I could work with. But um,
Yeah. So to your point, I think the reason why people struggle with boundaries is because they don't understand what a boundary is. Right?
mhm,
Like people often have this assumption that like if I
mhm,
share or express my boundaries, then
mhm,
that is pushing people away. And
mhm,
essentially, like what boundaries are there to do is to show people the door with the key
mhm,
to be able to come in and to be there, right? And I
mhm,
think even how people enforce their boundaries, people try
right,
to, a boundary to them is a form of control, right? So it's like,
mhm,
let's say you're somebody who isn't into texting a lot,
mhm,
right?
right,
And you're in me, I'm like somebody who I love texting like every
right,
single day, right?
mhm,
And most people will be like, well, if you don't text me every day,
mhm,
then this is wrong and I
right,
can't be with you. And it's like,
mhm,
that's not really showing people what your boundary is.
yeah,
Like you have to be really, really specific. Like, hey,
that's
I am somebody where communication is important to me. It
right.
doesn't mean we have to text all day, every day, but I would
Mhm,
just like some type of text
mhm,
per day, just so I know, like a check-in, just to know that you're
right.
okay, right?
Mhm,
And
exactly.
then if somebody is like, okay, you communicate your boundary, and then they do the exact opposite, then
Mhm,
people are usually like, what do you mean? Like, I just told
mhm,
you what this is. Like,
right.
and then they keep on pushing this narrative where it's like, that is a sign like they are not living up to the standard of your boundary. It's time to go.
Exactly.
But we
Exactly.
often bend too easy, or we try to
Yeah,
create a very unrealistic boundary of like, without
exactly.
being considerate of other people and what else. So
Mhm,
I think that
exactly.
right now
Right.
it's just a lot of people
Mhm,
are very detached to themselves, and I think we
mhm,
focus on the wrong
mhm.
things with relationship conversation.
Right. That's so good. And like you said, like if a person's boundary is, we don't have text all day, but like, good morning, hope you have a great day, probably won't hear from you until like lunch. If that's a boundary that you set, and especially in the beginning phases, and if that person doesn't do that, and for you, if that's something simple, like just say good morning, have a great day, everything X, Y, and Z, and it's okay to let that go, because obviously they're not willing to do that for you. And
Mhm.
sometimes you gotta be okay, well, nice talking to you, and that doesn't make you a bad person because you want to walk away from that. So that's so
Mhm.
true. Yeah. And so how do you balance individuality with partnership in relationship while still honoring the love and commitment?
I think individuality empowers the
Mhm.
community experience. So I think, or the partnership experience. I think the
Mhm.
more that you're connected with yourself, the more that you're able
Mhm.
to navigate in a healthy way with somebody else. So
Right.
it's like if you're at a place where, let's say, like you're having a really, really, really rough time.
Mm-hmm.
If you're connected with yourself, you're able to be aware of your emotions. You're able to be aware of what's going on with you. And even if you
Mm-hmm.
don't know exactly what you need specifically, because of course that changes, that adjusts day to
Right.
day and whatnot, you're able to communicate to somebody else like, hey, I
Mm-hmm.
am not in a good place. I'm
Right.
having a difficult time, which now by communicating that, that makes the partnership even stronger because now the other person is equipped with the necessary knowledge to be able
Right.
to navigate it. So now they can respond in a way that's like, hey, okay, so what do you
Mm-hmm.
need? What are you looking for? Do you
Mm-hmm.
need somebody to like comfort you? Do you need some free time? You know what I mean? So I think
Right.
a lot
Exactly.
of times like that individual experience
Right.
adds to the partnership. And then vice
Mm-hmm.
versa, when it comes to the partnership, like when you're with the right partner, they're
Right.
putting you in a position to experience things you've never experienced. They're taking you outside of your comfort zone sometimes. They're not making you, but they're
Mhm.
leading you to go to different like experiences and whatnot. It's a
Right.
different person, right? So
Right.
in that partnership, the
Mhm.
individual is able to be empowered and to grow and to
Right.
change based on kind of like how their dynamic is. So
Exactly.
it's on both sides. You're growing in a way, but the best thing to do is really
Mhm.
being able to get into that space where you're able to communicate and you understand self, you understand your
Mhm.
partner. It's funny. I was watching this like
Mhm.
podcast. I can't even remember the name, but
Mhm.
basically they say it's like most people think it's just me and
Mhm.
you when it
Mhm.
comes to a relationship, and it's like no,
Mhm.
it's you, it's your
Mhm.
partner, and it's the relationship. It's the three
Mhm.
entity. So it's
Right.
like you gotta focus on each entity. You
Right.
as an individual, your partner
Mhm.
has to focus on them as the individual. So you
Right.
guys also have to focus on y'all together. So it's these
Exactly.
three entities
Mhm.
within a relationship.
Right. That's good. And like you said, it all boils down like to having a healthy communication style between the two of you.
Mhm.
And I know mental health plays a major part on, like you said, how we see ourselves and how we interact in healthy relationships. Can mental health awareness be a good way to approach love and relationships in the Black community?
I think so. I
Mhm.
think absolutely. I probably sound like a dead horse or beating a dead horse, but it's like so much of how we feel about ourselves really
Mhm.
does affect how our relationships are in our life. So
Mhm.
if you're not in a great place,
Mhm.
and if you do not allow yourself to be aware that you're not in a great place, we've
Right.
all seen what happens with somebody who is internalizing what's going
Mhm.
on. They're not in a good mental and how they handle the people around
Yeah.
them. Sometimes people go into isolation, which
Right.
can be a very, very, very hurtful thing to
Mhm.
other people. Of
Mhm.
times of like times for myself where like my go-to used to always be like, oh, the world's going crazy. Well, I'm gonna
Mhm.
lock myself in a room. I'm cutting
Mhm.
contact, my phone on D&D, nobody talking to me. And
Right.
there's people who really love and care about me who feel
Mhm.
rejected because it's like,
Mhm.
yo, like just all I needed to know is you were going through something. I would have been there. I could have supported you, or like in all these
Right.
different ways. So I think being able to just promote mental health, be able to
Right.
promote healing, to get
Right.
more people into therapy, to have
Right.
more classes for children
Mhm.
about true emotional intelligence, and not just children,
Right.
because adults need emotional intelligence work and
Right.
emotional communication work and everything in
Mhm.
general. I think the
Mhm.
more that we can really lock into the parts of ourself
Right.
that influence our conversations and the
Mhm.
way that we navigate life, it only makes our experience as human beings better, like bigger
Right.
than just being black or white or whatever, but it makes the human experience so much better. And I think
Right.
from a standpoint to add is like not only do we need like more conversations around mental health, but I think we
Mhm.
need more conversations around the history and the
Mhm.
cultural experience of what it means to be black. Again, the more that you're aligned with your identity, the more that you
Right.
understand your history and where we've come from, it also empowers who you are as a person and how you love and how you go.
Exactly.
Again, like what we were talking about earlier about jumping the broom. It's like,
Right.
yo, when you learn something like that and you learn
Exactly.
how bad slavery was and the effect of
Mhm.
it, how love for them, there was no idea of black love. For them, it was this is love to survive. This is love for
Right.
my humanity. This is love because I can't do anything else, it
Right.
changes the dynamic of how you even think of loving as a black
That's
person, right? So
right. Very
I
true.
think mental health, I think history, like black history wise, like all of these things just needs to be
Right.
more in the conversation rather than the, oh, you make this much money and I make
Mhm.
that much money. It's like, come on, man. We're not
Right.
even really talking about the most important stuff.
Exactly. That's so true. And like you said, when you dive deep into it, it's like, oh wow, like you're blown away by what you discover. And do you believe Black love has healing powers? If so, what ways can it be a form of resilience or resistance?
Yeah, 100%.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
I think, like for me personally, I feel
Mhm.
like loving a black woman is
Mhm.
essentially a form of loving myself because a
Mhm.
black woman, for me, is the only person who actually can relate and understands
Mhm.
the plight of the black experience,
Right.
right? I
Right.
think being able to be with a partner who
Mhm.
understands like the cultural, the communal, the historical experience of blackness is
So
incredibly healing because
true.
now rather than spending time having to explain it, having
Yeah.
to share like what
Right.
it feels like or
Right.
why this is a problem or what this is or how it is and how it affects, like you
Right.
have somebody right across from you who gets it. They get
Exactly.
it fully, right? So I think in one
Exactly.
way that level of understanding is very healing. I think
Right.
that especially now in like today's society with so much going on in politics and in the
Right.
world, having somebody there who's just connected to
Mhm.
you and
Right.
who understands in a deeper, richer way,
Right.
that is healing in itself, right? It's like
Right.
we have this shared experience, we have this shared history, and now I don't have to spend my
Mhm.
time saying like, okay, so
Right.
you
Right.
know when
Wondering if you get
he
it or not.
yeah, like when he okay, so like the reason why I'm angry right now is because
Right.
he just killed this unarmed black
Yeah.
boy or black girl. And yeah, it's like just listen to the cops and that's what you think, but that's not
Mhm.
what it is. It's so much deeper
Right.
because we understand that when you're black, it's not
Right.
as simple. You know what I mean? It's like I
Yeah.
don't have to go through this
Exactly.
whole wraparound and explain it.
Mhm.
So I think it's just it creates this deeper understanding and honoring and respecting the culture. And I feel like that's
Right.
something you can only find with somebody who looks
Mhm.
like you, with somebody who has that shared experience.
Mhm. Very true. Very shared values. It's
Hmm.
very important. So how do we collectively break the narrative that Black love is always tumultuous or problematic?
Ooh, that is a
Mhm.
multifaceted.
Mhm.
Um, that's going to have to take a multifaceted approach
Right.
because I think that narrative it comes from so many different angles, right? Like
Mhm.
there's a media standpoint of it, there's a social
Yeah.
media standpoint from it, but there's also a standpoint that comes from like the own black experience of what people
Mhm.
experience in their own life. And
Right.
I always think about one of my mentees who I talked about, and I was really trying to help her understand like you
Yeah.
are so deserving of like a healthy
Mhm.
love. And in her
Right.
eyes, she was saying like but that it doesn't exist. And it's
Mm.
like the only healthy relationship I've seen is like from one of her friends. And she's like, everything
Mhm.
that I've grown up was toxic. It was broken. It was that, right? So
Mhm.
there's
Yeah.
this personal experience, there's this communal
Right.
experience, there's this media experience, and you're getting all these different angles of some people saying like, yo,
Right.
love is toxic. Black love is toxic. Black love
Right.
is broken. And
Mhm.
then like from a black woman's standpoint, you
Mhm.
know, it's a lot more difficult to find partnership, right? There's a
Mhm.
lot more black women in the world compared to black men. When you
Right.
add
Mhm.
incarceration rates, when you add mortality rates, when you
Mhm.
add the fact that like most people in America generally date people at their educational level, the black
Right.
women are
Mhm.
absolutely running and with degrees
Mhm.
and multiple degrees and all that, like there's so many difficulties that goes back to what I said earlier, that is so much
Right.
more systematic and bigger.
Mhm.
But I think from a more grounded standpoint, I know I'm getting on a tangent, sorry guys, but to get on a more grounded standpoint, the way
Mhm.
in which we can help kind of unpack this narrative is
Right.
being able to start really with our personal experiences and our background to understand like what is my experience with love? What is
Right.
my experience with Black love? And I think you have to do both. You can't just look at Black love without looking at love. You can't look at,
Mhm.
like, you have to look at the Black, you have to look at the love, and then you have to look at the Black love together and really
Mhm.
unpack their experiences. And
Mhm.
then you have to equip yourself with the tools and with almost like recreating your guidebook and your
Right.
framework of how you see this. So, like,
Right.
if your experiences have always been toxic and that's
Mhm.
all you've seen, then
Right.
it's easier for you to believe and see the world with a lens of like,
Right.
oh, now this is automatic toxic, right? So you
Right.
really have to like do the individual work to shift that mentality of saying
Exactly.
like, this has been my experience, but
Mhm.
my experience doesn't always dictate life. I can also look at other people's experiences, add
Exactly.
that to my toolbook and add that to
Mhm.
my guidebook, and now
Right.
navigate life with
Mhm.
this different lens of,
Yeah.
oh, it can be like this too. And it can be
Right.
like this. And what are the key factors in this relationship? And it's not saying like you're over here copying and pasting everybody's relationship
Right.
or holding anybody to a standard, but it's like,
Yeah.
what are the little things? Like maybe this
Yeah.
relationship did a really, really great job of communication. And it's like, oh, this is
Right.
what healthy communication can look like compared to my guide and my
Exactly.
understanding of what a toxic relationship looks like. So now you're
Right.
countering all these little individual pieces for your own personal
Yeah.
experience with something
Exactly.
more healthier. And now this
Mhm.
is the approach that you're going to end up taking to empower yourself. So I think it's just,
Right.
it's it's the hard thing. It's like you got to do
Right.
the individual work of really
Mhm.
being able to redefine it for yourself. And then
Exactly.
once you redefine it for yourself, then it's
Mhm.
like conversations like this that we're having, right? How
Right.
do I talk to somebody else? How do I bring
Exactly.
this there? How do I challenge their own mentality so they can see that it is different? And like
Right.
it's that almost like
Mhm.
each one teach one approach. And the
Right.
more you do that, the more that
Yeah.
you on a creative side, the more that we create a
Mhm.
lot more healthier content,
Exactly.
then it all starts to like
Right.
come back together.
Very true. Very true. What do you think Black love has to offer the world?
Oh, wow. That is a
Mhm.
great question.
Mhm.
I think everything. Like
Mhm.
truly,
Mhm.
we black blackness in general pushes
Right.
culture.
Yeah.
It pushes it influences the world in itself. I mean,
It
look at
is.
how far hip hop has gone. Look how far
Right.
the way that we dress, the way that
Right.
we play sports, you know what I
Ex
mean? Like how much of a cultural impact that is. Then
exactly.
when you add the love piece to it,
Mhm.
you add like the black partnership to it. Now it's
Right.
not me versus you. It's not,
Exactly.
you know what I mean? Now it's a
Exactly.
powerful collective, a
Yeah.
community experience. The black
Right.
family
Yes.
together is like will
Mhm.
ultimately like change the world for the better. So I
Exactly.
think I think what can it do for the world? I mean
Mhm.
everything. Like
Right.
everything is better when
Mhm.
blackness is at its tip top.
Mhm. Exactly. That's true. Our culture definitely influenced a lot in this world. And I want to thank you, Dr. Nigel, for joining me today, having this conversation with me. And thank you all for listening. And it's never too late to have a talk. I'll see you next time. Bye.